Carol.
Carol.
Yeah.
Depends if you're East Coast people call me Carol. So with your accent, I don't know, however you want to say it, Carol. People that have a Spanish background will call me Carole or something like that. So anyways, hey, welcome everyone to the Get Good podcast. I'm your host, Carol Freeman. This is the podcast for comedians that are serious about getting good. So whether you're trying to advance beyond the open mic scene or looking to get booked consistently at comedy clubs and more, this podcast is for you. I'm comedian Carol Freeman, and I'm interviewing headlining comedians, club owners, bookers, festival judges, comedy instructors, and more to find out their best tips, techniques, and strategies so that you can improve your stand-up comedy and get good. And guess what? Today, I'm so excited. We have international touring headliner Benny Darsow. Darsow? Am I saying that right?
You can pronounce that however you want because most people do. Okay. But Darsow is what my parents go with.
Darsow. Okay. Like sow the seeds. I'm going to get it wrong, but I just call you Ben. That's easy, right?
We go Ben or Benny. Let's do that.
Ben or Benny. Benny is an Australian comedian who delivers laugh out loud, observational, and I can't speak perfectly on this. So improvised stand-up. He's headlining top-tier comedy clubs in Australia, Vancouver, and Kuala Lumpur. I knew I was going to mess that up. He's also had stints performing in London and Los Angeles. And Ben spends about 2 weeks a month out at sea on cruise ships. So I can't wait to talk about how you got into that and how that is for you. And then the rest of the time, he's performing around Australia in the clubs, comedy festivals, mining communities. I want to know more about that, regional theaters, and occasional corporate events. So, hey, everyone, help me welcome Benny. Ben.
Hey, thanks so much. Thanks, Carol. And hello, everybody. Good to be here.
So glad. And you know what? This guy is so dedicated to helping you all. It's like 8 a.m. for him there in Australia. So that, this guy is a giver.
I love how normal that should sound to the rest of the outside world, but anyone in the comedy community is like, "Oh man, right? This guy just took a bullet."
Right? Yeah. Usually anything where people are like, "Oh, we're gonna do this thing at 9," and I'm like, "Oh, see, that means I need to get up and shower before and brush my hair, and that's just way too early." So. Welcome to the show. This is an interactive show, so if you've got any questions for Benny, I'm going to interview him. But if you've got any questions, and let us know where you're joining from too, and we'll give you a little shout out here on the show. So Benny, let's go back to the beginning. How long have you been doing comedy?
I started in 2002, so 21 years to this point.
Wow.
Let's say 9 months off in 2020 with the COVID pandemic. So I'm right on 20 years, I'd say.
That's so funny. I always think of that, like, comics that have shorter time in, how do we count the time off for, how long we've been doing comedy? Do we subtract that? Do we add it? And I always thought to myself, like, well, veteran comics like you that have been doing for 20 years, they don't say like, well, minus this, that, but I guess I was wrong. We all want credit for time off, time served.
That's true. I mean, I certainly think there was a lot to absorb and a lot to learn from that time. I guess just looking at it from the perspective of it was the best part of 9 months not on stage. Here in Australia, we sort of, responded slightly differently depending on which state you were in. Where I was in, it wasn't as hard. I'm from Adelaide in South Australia. But we still had definitely some venue closure for a few months, really severe venue restrictions in terms of the numbers of people that could kind of, be in a place after that. And, from that sort of promoter's perspective, it wasn't viable for a few months to even run shows, when you got told you could have 17 people sitting, 4 meters away from the nearest person in their venue and they need to think about it, from a ticket sales perspective. And then there was no interstate travel as well within Australia. It was crazy. This country that we feel in normal times is a united thing just became so segregated, and there were restrictions to get from one state to another at certain times. You just literally could not get from a particular state into another state. It was a wild time. It was the best part of 9 months, I reckon, at the very minimum for most comics. And some of them, if they were more based in Victoria, I'm not sure how much you heard about that. Obviously, Melbourne's the capital city there. They had 2 stints of hard lockdowns that I reckon went for something in the order of like 200 days each of them. So I can't imagine what it would have been like, as a performer there, or even just living there, to be honest.
Wow, yeah, I always think of Australia as the rebel country, and then seeing how they handled the pandemic, I was like, oh no, they had a lot of restrictions and shutdowns, and so I'm glad we're all on the other side of that. I remember too trying to produce a show after things started opening up in the Washington area, and people were afraid to laugh. I found they were a little bit restricted because we'd been told that our breath could kill somebody else, so they're kind of like, ha, 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 ha. Did you find that after you started?
Yeah, I still see the occasional person, with the mask on in the comedy shows. I know we'll talk a little more down the track about the cruise ship environment, but there's generally a few people in each of those audiences, and I think that was another challenge when performing did actually sort of start to make its way back. As the pandemic was kind of tailing off, was promoters had roomfuls of people wearing masks, and so you'd get on stage and you're performing to people, as you say, who are apprehensive or worried about how they can respond, and you can't see their response, and it was just a weird time, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yes, and then Arizona down here ends up being one of the freedom states that, like, we had about 6 weeks of lockdown, and then they're like, just go back to normal life, you're fine.
Yeah, wow, okay, there you go, done and dusted.
Yeah, and then, but Washington State, where I lived for 27 years, they were closed for almost two years, restricting everything. So it's just very, very different from state to state how things were handled here. But again, we made it.
Yeah.
So do you remember back 20 some plus years ago, do you remember your first open mic? Do you remember your first, how you got hooked into all this comedy stuff?
Yeah, I sure do. And 20 years ago, it's funny you even just sort of say open mic. Like that probably wasn't even a term that people would have sort of been familiar with here.
Okay.
There was so little stand up. I remember before I'd done stand up, I'd seen Jerry Seinfeld do those little snippets on his show, from those little New York clubs, and I think I'd seen somewhere a DVD of Eddie Murphy doing Delirious, and that was literally it. I'd never seen it live, and we have this comedy competition that's still running to this day. It's essentially produced by the Melbourne Comedy Festival, but it's a nationwide competition, and it's an opportunity for people to just get a little foot into the industry. It's called Raw Comedy, and that was my first gig in a very sort of supportive little environment, just one of the heats of that. Probably as good an opportunity as any to get on stage and be comfortable that if you don't particularly do well, or it's not for you, it's not going to be a life scarring experience. And for me, it went probably as well as it could, and that was my little leg into this crazy world.
So it sounds like it's similar to, we do shows here called like New Faces, where it's like brand new comics get up at the big clubs. So you said like open mics weren't a thing back then. So what was kind of the path of getting started in comedy then? Or they just call them something different?
Yeah. Look, there probably were things called open mics, and that probably meant you could bring a guitar, or you could read poetry, or maybe you could do comedy, but not in the sense that we have it here now, and you guys have it even more there, I'm sure, where there's a genuine sort of open mic circuit where comics can really sort of cut their teeth before they maybe sort of, transition into some of the more established clubs. Yeah. So, that at that stage, it didn't exist. As I said, I began in Adelaide, and from recollection, when we were in the early 2000s there, we had a Irish pub, which is where I did my first show. It was a genuine kind of front bar gig. I'm sure we can all picture that. The little room within that venue, actually, that I did my heat in, my very first gig, was a little upstairs kind of function room. So it was a little safe harbor within a crazy Irish pub that I would do many times sort of over the following few years. And then we also had a little arty kind of underground venue as well, named Rhino Room. So it was literally just the two of those. But I think it was a good little contrast as well. Given that we only had a couple of venues, you sort of got your venue where people might go and sort of stand there and have a few beers and a pretty mainstream crowd, and then you had your little kind of funky upstairs attic kind of venue as well, where it was a different clientele, and perhaps a different style of comedy that would kind of appeal up there as well. So for having had very few options, I think it was actually quite fortunate the way that we did at least have those two distinctly different types of venue available to us then.
It's interesting how much comedy has changed in 20 years, at least the career path, right? Like, I know a lot of people that are about 20-ish years in, and back then it was like, oh, you did an open mic, and then somebody saw you and they're like, hey, you want to go on the road and do 20 minutes 3 months into comedy? And they're like, so it was getting lucky, and now people grind and toil for 5 years or 10 years, and they're like, when am I going to get my break? And so what was your career path? You got raw comedy, it went well. And, did you just go into doing 10, 20-minute sets, or what was your progression in the beginning? Do you remember back then?
Yeah. For me, it was very brick on brick. And that's just sort of funny, just listening to you sort of talk about how quickly I think people can get good at this now, with multiple shows a week. They might not be great, they might be predominantly to other comics, for a while, or, just a scattering of sort of audience members. But, it's been like that for a while here in Australia. Sorry, just to slightly digress, but Sydney, one of our probably bigger two scenes in the country. We have Sydney and Melbourne. I would say they would be our biggest. That's a city that I've really sort of gravitated towards over the last kind of decade. You could do 5 shows a night there, and I look at that kind of learning curve, that trajectory that a newer comic can have now, with those kind of resources versus, I remember looking at my diary, in those first couple of years when I was starting out in Adelaide, and you'd be doing well if you got 2 opportunities on stage in a month.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, for real. Like it was literally that kind of a pace at the start. You'd put this little Rhino gig and put a circle around it on this date, and then 2.5 weeks later you knew you had a spot at the Irish pub, and you sort of see if your material was strong enough to do that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So just a completely different beast. I think younger comics now would just be horrified at how early on, or how much of an infancy the art form was in here. 20 years ago. Now it's on it's on YouTube, it's on Netflix, it's on everything. We have all these podcasts so people can just listen to comics behind the scenes, just talking about comedy. Like it's this thing now that's just so massively out in the open and accessible, isn't it? Like 20 years ago, holy moly, there was just there was very very little of that. And so you ask about what was sort of the early kind of career path. I think it wasn't a career path. It was just this kind of like fun thing, like you can't make something out of something that it's not, and for better or worse, possibly for better, I would say it was just a very organic thing for me, just to kind of, I was at university, I was doing a commerce degree, finance and marketing majors, so sort of very academic. I was playing a lot of golf. I played pennant golf at a good level with a lot of friends who would go on to play professionally from that. So that was taking up a lot of my energy. And then I was also playing basketball. I went back to basketball pretty hard in the second half of my 20s. So I was just kind of living life, and this thing was just kind of ticking along for the first couple of years in Adelaide. We're one of we're a capital city in Australia, but slightly smaller, maybe probably fifth or sixth biggest city. So don't picture a giant Melbourne or a Sydney, but we weren't a tiny little country town. It was just a little safe harbour to kind of grow up, and so that was really where sort of things started for me, very very organically. And it was probably about the 3-year mark, I'd say, before I was able to just start jumping over the border, about a 50-minute flight to Melbourne, and performing at some of their clubs, and taking a few steps forward there. But yeah, certainly those first couple of years, it was just a very very organic little process.
So you enjoyed it, but you did it as much as it was available to you, but there wasn't a ton of opportunity. But it sounds like you just, like you said, you organically just kind of progressed. And would you remember a point where you're like, I think this is something that I want to do full time, or are you still contemplating it?
Yeah, that's so interesting. Something just jumped into my head from, I'm going to say I might have been doing it a year or something. So I started when I was 20 on the dot. Okay. I was at university at that time, and as I said, doing those other things as well on the side. And I remember I was in the city. I can remember exactly where it was, on one of our sort of main little strips, outside a particular cafe, and a buddy of mine from high school, who I just bumped into and who caught wind that I'd sort of started doing a little bit of stand-up, asked me something along the lines of, oh, how far do you want to take this? And it was one of those moments where you get prompted to verbalize what you're feeling without having actually maybe done that to yourself before. And I just remember saying, I don't think I'm ever going to stop doing this. So there was something obviously very, very early on, where I knew that I'd found something that I loved doing. It was obviously just in the extremely early stages of building a skill base, and you have no idea how far it'll go. But I just knew early on whether this is something that, I do once a month because it's so much fun and I have some beers with some people and it's this, real electric little buzz, or whether this is something I do end up turning into my career and it, goes wherever it goes. This is something I cannot see myself ever not doing. So I distinctly remember that moment.
It is such a weird career, right? Because it's kind of the only one where, I mean, there are people that teach things a little bit, and there are a few books out now, but it's really, you got to kind of figure it out on your own. There's no college degree in it. There's no laid out career path, and really everybody kind of makes it their own too. So it's so hard. And I think that's part of why it makes it so addictive for people too, because it's like the rush of gambling. You never know, especially in the beginning, when it's going to be good and when it's going to be bad, and you just keep going and get hooked in.
Yeah, that's so true, and I think that's one of the central appeals of it is there's nothing that you have to do if you want to do whatever your version of comedy is, and you can get good enough at that. You're doing comedy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, you talk about sort of some of those comedy courses early on and so forth. Some of them can be, you know, extremely helpful, and I think you know, ones that perhaps just prompt you sort of how to structure things, or at the very least just kind of maybe give you an introduction into the industry, or you know, a little more insight here or there. um that can definitely have value. I would totally agree with that. um I feel like once you've got that little footing though, um it's just so much along the lines of where you want to take it, isn't it? It's such a unique thing, whether you have some kind of structural understanding or not. If you're going to go anywhere with it, and if it's going to mean anything to you, it's going to be extremely self-driven, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you remember a time in the last 20 years where you were asked, somebody wanted to book you for a time amount that you knew you didn't have yet? And what was your approach to that gig?
That's funny. um I don't recall any specific moment like that, but we have a slightly different setup here in certain ways, where we have a festival circuit in Australia. So
Okay.
you can kind of go from like mid-January through till almost kind of probably April, doing Perth Fringe World, Adelaide Fringe, Melbourne Comedy Festival, and then dovetailing into Sydney Comedy Festival. And um, most, if not all, of those festivals are application based. So they're not curated. If you think you've got a show, you can nominate that. You've obviously got to pay your registration fee, pay your venue hire, pay your marketing, all of that kind of business, and then put the time aside to perform the shows and hopefully make a kind of a return on them that's worthwhile. And I reckon I've definitely had certain festivals where I've I've done the work, so to speak, over the last year, and I've got a really good, fresh kind of body of material. Even if it's not completely brand new, it's a substantial, fresh show for, you know, that particular city that I didn't have the last time I was there. And I've had some terrific festivals where I've sold good numbers. It's been worthwhile. Um, you know, the audiences have been great. You can feel that you create a buzz. And then I've definitely had other festivals where I've overextended in uh, you know, telling the market that I've got a new show, and I've rocked up there and quite possibly in the back of my mind known that maybe I'm about half done with what I really should have. And
Okay.
it's crazy um, how directly that will correlate with the audience buzz not being there, the numbers not being there, the show substance not being there as well. It's almost like it kind of it finds you out before you realize that you've maybe overextended.
So tell me more about that, putting on a show within the festival, because like you said, it sounds very different than, what's going on in the States. And so basically to be part of the festival, it sounds like you say, I'm going to put on a show and you're the headliner. Do you have an opening act as well? And then you run for several nights, or tell me more about what it looks like.
Yeah, so you'll typically put on your own show. Some people might have an opening act. You might sort of have, a newer comic, perhaps do 5 or 10 minutes. And I've definitely done that at certain times. And I've also been that newer comic to a few people earlier on. And it can actually be a really helpful thing just to almost kind of, show someone what's involved, because it's such a different beast. If you're just used to, rocking up and a promoter has kind of, done the work to get a crowd in there, and someone else has handled the ticketing, and someone else has created the relationship with the venue, and all of those other things that you don't really see when you just rock up knowing that you've got a little spot and that's your job. it's so massively eye-opening, and I think one of the things it shows you is that being on stage and performing is like the visible fun tip of the iceberg. Like, if you're gonna be responsible for producing something, those moments, or that hour, or however long it is that you're on stage, that's almost the relief at the end of it all. That other stuff, there's so much involved, isn't there? So I think that process of having an opener can definitely be beneficial to sort of open someone's eyes. And I would say that the festival model that we have here, that is obviously a little different to, or at least what I've sort of seen in the US, where you more kind of work on building an act, that you can sort of take around the clubs, something that makes its way to being sort of bulletproof and repeatable, etc. The festivals are a really good opportunity here for people to get that stage time, perhaps early on in their career. You might only be sort of 2, 3, 4 years in, and all of a sudden you're booking in 6 nights a week for a month in a particular city, and you know that you've got the best part of an hour on stage. That's a huge positive in that sense. There's no faking stage time, and that can really help you move forward. And I think a creative deadline like that as well, where in a 12-month cycle that you essentially need to have another 40, 50 minutes of content, however it is that you structure that, whether you're a jokey person or a story person, that can be a very, very good thing just to have sitting there that pushes you creatively. I think the downsides sometimes, and more experienced comics will sometimes have a little bit of a joke about it under their breath, is you sort of see people who are absolutely nowhere near ready to be presenting 50 minutes of comedy on stage, pushing themselves in those environments. But I think once again, it's one of those things where you'll get the reflections of where you're at. If you've got a powerhouse comic who's coming to town, who's got a great 50 and they've built up a profile over a few years, and in a club comedy scene, their level is exceptional. They're gonna perform to a lot of people, and they're gonna have a very worthwhile month. And if you're someone who's overextended and it's perhaps a challenge that's slightly ahead of you, but you've done well to push yourself to do, well, you might find yourself performing to some family and friends who live in that city, and grinding out the month that way. So I do think it self-regulates.
Wow, it's so fascinating how different the scene is there, and just the progression of the career, and how that's very, very different. So so you mentioned, so part of the festival then would be producing one of these events. And episode 2, I talked with Corey Michaelis, and he gave some tips as far as, one of the things he recommended was having, a newer comic have to produce a show, because it gives you a lot of insights as to what it's like to be a producer and what goes into putting on a show. Do you have some tips for producing a show that has a good turnout and is profitable?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the profitability thing is outside of your control. That's what I've learned. I've had festivals that have been very profitable, and I've had festivals where I have worked hard and made absolutely nothing. I think that advice is just really good in general, though. Just for all of the things that you learn very quickly that you get a much deeper insight into what has gone on, prior to you arriving 15 minutes before showtime, when you go back to doing the clubs, or a little open mic, or an independent room that someone produces. And I think it just it should be humbling, because there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes. And we're all, what am I trying to say? I don't think you don't want to sort of have a go at anyone for not sort of knowing what you don't know early on. You know what I mean? Where there's so much stuff that we're taking in, even just being on stage, and how do I interact with an audience, and how do you try to sort of consistently produce laughs, etc. I mean, that's obviously the thing very early on that you're focusing on. But I think the more you can learn about all of this other stuff behind the scenes, you talk about how to generate an audience, you realize at a certain point, as well as just needing to sort of be in a position where you can consistently do well on stage, you need to build an audience. And it's like, holy moly, there's another entire aspect to what it is that you need to do to make it head in that sort of viable professional direction, and how much work is required on that. Okay, so we're setting up social media accounts. We're now filming gigs. Okay, we're now purchasing a camera. We're now learning how a camera's audio plugs into a sound system. We're now learning how to use video editing software. We're learning what kind of content people like us to put out online to, keep them looped into our journey. And how, that stuff is extremely important, early on, perhaps before you've got a bigger platform that's handled a little more independently, like perhaps you're on a TV show or something like that. So, that even that just could blow someone's mind for 3 years. It's like, go and let people know somehow that what you're doing is now worth watching, and compete with everybody else who's already doing that.
It's so true. We have to wear so many hats now. I mean, probably a huge difference 20 years ago versus now. Now you got to do, like you said, all the social media stuff, and you got to edit the clips, and you got to produce that and put all that out. You didn't have to do any of that 20 years ago.
Yeah, it's crazy, and I think the game changed massively on that as well. Like, I really do come from a generation where, at least for the first few years, the equation for us was get good enough that you sort of got picked up on some kind of TV or radio, and then that platformed you out there. And because the channels were so limited for people to kind of, watch stand-up or just to consume content, once you kind of had that platform, you'd go into a festival and just sell it out because you were so-and-so off of the so-and-so show. Do you know what I mean? Now there's what are we talking, like 1,000 times the number of platforms? Traditional media doesn't have the same impact. And I definitely think there were sort of times maybe a few years ago where I was almost sort of still kind of operating that old paradigm. I think very fortunately at the essence of that was working on my craft. So, you're telling yourself if you work on what you're doing, those kind of opportunities will present, and that'll be your key to a broader profile. And perhaps it didn't work out like that, but at the very least you're still getting better. So I don't think maybe on my part being slow to react to that was a total waste. I still think it's found its way to where it's going. But you get comics coming in, let's say 10 years later than me, so about 10 years ago, who are younger. They've grown up with a mobile phone in their hand since they were 10. They just kind of get all of this kind of stuff, and a year or two in, and they're developing like monster social media followings just because they kind of understand it. And we have just to slightly sort of articulate this with an example. We have a comic here. I won't even sort of mention names or anything like that. I performed with him in a club a year or two ago. I think he's about 5 or 6 years into his career, and he just got the whole, I'm going to film crowd work that I do, and I'm going to put it up online. And he was very, very savvy with all of that kind of stuff. So he's not even necessarily at like a club headlining level, but good enough to kind of have a repeatable product that he's putting out there. He's making, depending on whose reports you believe, he's making somewhere between $2 and $4 million a year now in Australia, 6 or 7 years into his career. And he's never been backed by TV. He's never been backed by radio. and he's not even a genuine, club headliner, so to speak. He's just someone who is good and he's funny, and I really enjoy watching him. But someone who sort of got how the game kind of changed and was an early adopter and was a very competent early adopter. And now he's sitting there with a studio, a team of people that come to every gig. He's doing his own theatre shows. The audience are given a bunch of questions before each show, so that it almost kind of fuels, the type of audience interaction he's trying to get on camera. And you look at that and you go, that's just literally a completely different game. That we, could choose, I guess, if we want to try and play, and you can go about this thing in a completely different way to even just 20 years ago.
Oh, it's so true. Yeah. And it, I think a lot of it has to do with, like we were talking about the pandemic and how that forced a big change with social media. And it's so different. I mean, like you said, 20 years ago, the goal was like, if I can get on a sitcom, I'm made as a comedian. And, even when I was starting, 5 or 6 years ago, the advice was like, pick your home club, go spend all of your time there, and you're going to work your way up from their open mic. And then hopefully you can start hosting and featuring on the weekends there. And even that's not as available anymore. A lot of the clubs post-pandemic don't do open mics anymore. And so, like you said, the social media has been just a game changer for like those younger people that have that all figured out. And it's a totally different path that wasn't even there 5 years ago.
Yeah, that's so true. And when you just sort of said that pathway within a home club of, I'm doing the 5-minute spot, I'm now the middle bracket, I'm now the host, I'm now the headliner. That's 100% the structure that I grew up with, and now it's like, go and build 2 million followers on social media, do stand-up comedy for 2 years, and then tour your theatre show regionally.
Does a part of you go like, it's not fair? It's not fair.
Well, I think thankfully I'm enough of a nerd about the craft that I still value just, to be blunt, getting good at the craft. And that means a lot to me, or the pursuit of that means a lot to me. And I'm making enough money, that I can absolutely already do this viably. And I'm, paying down a home loan on a house I should own in the next probably, 3 years maybe. So I'm doing fine. It just sort of hasn't been that meteoric kind of sort of trajectory that some of these younger comics have. But I honestly, I mean, who wouldn't want perhaps some of the call it success, I guess, in general, that they're sort of creating that early. But I think that there's a part of me that knows that there are no shortcuts with the creative side of this, the craft side of it, understanding people, understanding audiences. And I think once you're making enough to viably do it, and also you sort of feel confident that you can continue to make more of it and become more successful. I think once you sort of program like that, it's all about the craft. And I wouldn't exchange that for perhaps being someone who has been sort of thrown into that kind of world that quickly, and possibly that ill-equipped, where their fans are like, oh man, we love this person and the skits they do online, or their character or whatever, and then they're in that live show and 7 minutes in, it's like, holy moly, like this just doesn't have the nuts and bolts of a seasoned stand-up, that kind of a thing.
Yeah, it's and I like how you organically just threw in the name of our podcast here. So the Get Good. You said you want to see them getting good. So I'm like, oh, good. The name that I chose for this, which I'll give a shout out to actually Kevin Eggleston helped me pick a name for this, but the Get Good podcast. So that's good. It comes up organically, so it's a good title helping people get good. That's what we're here about. So,
Yeah,
so do you
yeah.
want,
And
so go ahead.
sorry, Cal. Just one other thing that you mentioned there as well. You know, when you sort of do have that kind of home club and you're progressing maybe a little more through those sort of traditional pathways, is you get to get good by watching
Mm-hmm.
people who are 10, 20, 30 years, further down the track than you are, and I mean, like, we can all sort of watch stuff online, and that definitely sort of has value, but just when you're in a club, you feel the atmosphere that's in there that night. You can see
Mm-hmm.
all of the things that are sort of happening, off stage, and then you get to sort of see firsthand someone, a master of the craft, work that, and maybe you get to sort of see that night in, night out, where those variables are completely changed, and you still get to see how someone shuffles those variables, produces the environment they want very quickly, and then takes an audience from there. I think that's one thing that people who perhaps have that sort of success early on with having developed their own audience, and then all of a sudden they're out there on the road, and maybe they're generous enough to sort of take a newer comic out there for a few minutes, and a little bit of company. That they don't get to see that. They get to have their own journey of sort of interacting with their audiences and kind of building their skills, but you're not getting to learn firsthand off of people who have got themselves so much further down the track in terms of the actual craft.
Yeah, just to get in to see all the different styles and the variety that you get hanging out at a club and watching all the shows that you possibly can. I
Yeah,
mean, even
yeah,
before I got started in comedy, that was my favorite thing to do. I would go. We lost a lot of the clubs in the Seattle scene, but Parlor Live was one that died actually a year before the pandemic. I guess they saw it coming, but I would go and watch all the shows they produced. So it was kind of the first time that I learned that I saw the host, and I would see them several nights in a row, and I'm like, wait, why is he telling the same jokes he told last night? I was just, just as an audience member, it kind of like ruined it for me a little bit. Like, I started to see behind the curtain of, wait, the
yeah,
magic is getting ruined. I just saw how the trick is made.
yeah. This art has a science component as well to it.
Well, and it's also when you start to see people that do crowd work a lot. So I got to be involved in the World Series of Comedy in the Phoenix satellite this year, and Joe Lowers, spoil it for those of you that are going to go, but like he after the comics perform that are in the festival, then they have a closer comic that does about 10 minutes, and then Joe goes up to announce the winners, but he also then just kind of goes into this crowd work bit, and so the audience doesn't really know that that's what he's going to do. But while crowd work is so popular right now, they love it, and he's a killer at it. But I got to watch 6 shows of him doing that, because I just came and watched all the shows that were at our satellite here in Phoenix. And I had heard this before, that crowd work isn't like, the audience feels like you just made this up. Like, they see you with your hat backwards, and the comic says some comment about that, and it sounds like that's the first time they ever said it, and you were the inspiration for that joke. But it turns out that in their tool belt of crowd work jokes, they've got the joke for the guy with the backwards hat, that anytime they see somebody in the audience, they'll say that. And so I got to see that unveiled as I got to see Joe do 6 nights of crowd work, or 6 different shows of crowd work. I got to see that he had the joke for this guy and the joke for this thing, and I won't spoil his jokes, but it was great though, because the audience felt like it was so organic. And as a comic, I got to see how that's all crafted to make the audience feel like they're so special, and he's so good at what he's doing. He's making all this up, but he obviously a master at what he's doing too. So anyways, that was a more of that, like, getting the experience of seeing the behind the scenes, and what's the phrase? How get to see how the sauce is made, or the donuts are made. I don't even know that phrase, but hey, Cricket's here. She supports the show. Cricket's a Phoenix comic, so welcome. Glad you're here, Cricket.
Hey. Yeah, that's so true what you're sort of saying. You see the layers, where it's like there's scripted material, and then there's impro that you've essentially rehearsed, or you've established previously, that you can bring out, that looks like it's in the moment, and then there's genuine improv in the moment, And so
Yeah.
it's like right there, that's 3 tiers of what you're actually delivering that the audience doesn't necessarily know which one's which, or what's just for them.
Yeah. So Cricket's comment, I love watching crowd work, definitely working on that formula. So Benny, do you do much crowd work? Do you have tips? I know Jason had told me that you really like to mentor comics. So do you have tips for how to develop crowd work?
Oh wow. I love doing crowd work. I love a well structured joke for sure. But I think the crowd work stuff is uh, it's 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 the it's the really fun stuff, because it's it's just genuinely there in the moment. I certainly appreciate as well, like what you're just referring to, those bits of crowd work that sort of get established over times, where sort of responses that you're going to have to certain situations. I think that stuff can really help as well. That's good to have in your arsenal. But I think if you can just genuinely be in there and be present with an audience, the platform that then creates, to sell your material, is huge. I mean, you get the laughs off that beautiful improvised moment, which are special in themselves. But I think what people don't necessarily realize is that connection that you're creating with the audience when you're doing that, the foundation that then creates for you to be like, oh, okay, guys, and now here's such and such, which I was sort of going to do anyway, regardless of who was in this audience tonight. Their receptivity to that is so much higher. I think it's almost like night and day sometimes.
So you're saying
so
you'll ask a question that then leads into a joke that you were going to tell. Is that what you're saying?
Possibly, like whatever the way is that you do it, whether it's asking a question or whatever it is, or whether it's just sort of being there with them and kind of vibing off them, whatever it is, but just to sort of kind of create that sort of personal rapport where they are aware that you are in that room with them. Whether it's as direct as a sort of a question on something and then a response back, or whether it sort of happens a little more organically, sort of however it is. It's almost like I think it's the X factor that can make a good set great, and and be the bridge that you need, with an audience where maybe people are struggling and the audience sort of aren't particularly kind of invested in anything, and then you come along and you just create that connection. It's like you're the person they're going to listen to, even if your jokes aren't structurally as good as the last person's.
So it sounds like what you see crowd work doing, at least for you, is that helping you connect with the audience. Maybe if there's a disconnect, or just in general to help them feel like, hey, I'm here with you. We're doing this together.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's just a personal thing, but for me, I love it when stand-up is conversational. And that doesn't mean that you just kind of aimlessly ramble with unstructured stuff. I mean, the illusion is that that's kind of what you're doing. It's still well-structured stuff, but can you present that in a way that appears conversational? Can you get into your joke in a way that appears conversational? Can you transition it smoothly from crowd work where you genuinely are producing improvised laughs, and then almost kind of, oh, by the by, here's this thing, which is a really well-structured bit that has 6 strong lines in it that goes for 2 minutes. And then by the end of that, the audience has kind of found their way sort of so organically off of what everybody knows was improvisation to start with. And they're possibly sitting there going, holy moly, like that last 3 minutes was just made up. And then maybe you do that 10 times over a half-hour headline set, and people walk up to you and just go, was that whole thing made up? You know what I mean? Like, I mean, obviously there would be people who would be a little more comedy savvy, like what you sort of said when you saw, those performers night in, night out sort of working the stuff. I'm not saying people are completely sort of blind or oblivious, but it certainly sort of has that very in the moment feel. I think if you can create that, and I think on those nights when it goes well, there's an extra degree of awe there, where an audience is like, holy moly, you just kind of found the beat of that bouncing ball on the karaoke machine, and you just kind of rode it, whereas in reality it was quite possibly 10 things that you absolutely knew you were going to do before you got on stage, but you found a way for each of them to kind of find its moment to sort of enter the set.
So because I've attended different workshops that kind of talk about a structure of crowd work, and so do you? And it sounds like you've kind of hinted at having some kind of a structure to it, but also it sounds like you want it to be organic, or a lot of times it is organic for you. Do you have something that you're willing to share as far as like, do you think about like, okay, so I'm going to do this 5-minute opener and then I'm going to do a little crowd work, or is it always organic? Is it something, what kind of cues you to start doing a little bit of crowd work?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not even sure I sort of have a formula. And I think honestly, I think some nights, like the energy can be there that you do walk out on stage, and if you just kind of like, bring a good sort of presence and vibe, you can almost go straight into material, and then sort of the moments of connection will kind of spring off of that. Honestly, I think sometimes that happens. I think sometimes the energy is such that you don't really need to kind of have a catalyst to create that connection. It just kind of finds its way there, and then perhaps having done a joke or two, if you do sort of then respond to something that happens, or a moment kind of organically arises or something like that you deal with in the moment, and they can see that you've dealt with in the moment, well then you've kind of found that gear. I think that's absolutely one of the ways in which it can happen. And then I think maybe sort of more along the lines of your question, there are other nights where you need to kind of bring that catalyst to create that connection. Maybe it's kind of maybe it is asking a particular question, or singling out a particular person or something, just in a way that brings maybe yourself or the audience into the moment. I've had nights where I felt really kind of like sleepy or something like that, or you feel like you're just a little bit elsewhere, or your hamster's just a little bit slow or something, and then it's like, just for me it's just like, find someone in the room to engage with, and then all of a sudden it's like, you're in a conversation. There's a natural rhythm, there's a back and forth, it brings you into the moment. You have to sort of react, and I don't know, it's almost like just kind of finding something that sort of ignites you, and sort of simultaneously shows the audience that you're not afraid to kind of directly engage with them. Whereas perhaps on a night like that where you feel a bit cloudy or something, if you don't go to that, and you maybe just kind of go through the motions of your content, maybe on that kind of a night you don't deliver it as well, and the audience don't sort of feel particularly connected to you, and you walk off and it's like, oh, that was a bit sort of 6 out of 10-y kind of thing, you know what I mean? But just sort of accepting that for whatever reason, and for whatever might have happened that day, you're just a little bit kind of woolly, and then going, yeah, that's great, but I'm just going to sort of spark this moment up here. It's almost like it's a safety net. I think it's a safety net that brings you back into the moment.
And maybe I'm asking questions that you've never thought that deeply about. It's just what you do, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, do you do a lot of crowd work?
No. No, but I've taken workshops for different people, and one of them was like, kind of pre-writing some responses that you would say, like, again, like thinking about somebody with the hat backwards, I might think of like, different responses, and then thinking of a kind of a leading question of like, I haven't thought this far through, but like, asking some question of you about your hat, and then knowing that you're going to answer it like in a way that's going to be this way, or thinking of the possible responses. And part of it can be that you just go out and genuinely talk to enough people that you spontaneously come up with something funny, and then you're like, okay, I don't remember that for next time as something that I could possibly say. I've been told that, ask 3 questions and try to get to a laugh. If after 3 questions, change, pick a different person or something like that. Basically, it's like that person's not going to lead you anywhere. And so pick a different topic. So anyways, I've been to workshops that like have a formulaic version of teaching crowd work. I'm just right now at a point of like, I just want to work on my core jokes and getting those good. And I'm not at a place where I feel like I need a strong crowd work set, or I feel like that's more of like headliner level is somebody who's going to need to have strong crowd work ability doing, hosting set or guest set and things like that. It's like, where do I need to have crowd work ability right now? It's just my opinion anyways. So.
Yeah. I get you. Well, I think whenever, or if you decide to do it, but back yourself that you'd be great at it. I mean, you host a podcast and you know how to converse and ask questions and listen to answers and use that to go on to the next thing. I think crowd work's very similar. Like you do have certain things where you might have heard a particular response before, and you can sort of just kind of wedge something in there. But I think often the best crowd work is just kind of being present in that moment, allowing it to go where it goes. Quite often the audience member will be the person that sort of brings the little nugget of gold or the moment of weirdness or something. And if you can just be in that moment and allow it to sort of be whatever it is, I think that's the best stuff. And one other thing, just quickly with sort of comics doing crowd work, it's like if you just think it's essentially just a conversation, most of us are probably going to be reasonable at a conversation, even if we're a bit awkward. That could probably possibly add to the appeal of doing crowd work if you're a little bit of an awkward kind of person. Just momentarily lost my train of thought. In terms of reaching for something sort of funny, it's like you're a comic. You naturally see the world in a funny way. It's like, back yourself to have that conversation. There just happen to be other people watching that conversation, and trust that your natural funny way of perceiving and spinning the world will somehow sort of shine through, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And now that you say that, I'm thinking back to like, oh yeah, I've done crowd work multiple times, but it was in the moment where somebody had said something in the crowd and I was reacting to that. So You're right. I actually naturally have done that. And I guess on my mind I'm thinking of crowd work as this intentional, especially now with all the clips that everybody puts out with it. It seems like it's its own thing that, it's a section of your act is crowd work. But I definitely have had moments of it spontaneously that have, I'm thinking of, one thing specifically, but it's like I'd have to say the joke and the punchline, and lady in the crowd actually reacted and she goes, ooh. And it was like, and I said, oh, ooh, like, are you, and again, like, it's not going to make sense or be funny without the whole joke, but it's like, I was like, oh, are you a delicate little flower? You can't handle that, and so there are definitely times that I've done that. You're right. And I took an improv class for a while because one of our local club owners here, Dave Specht, he's one of the best crowd work people I've ever seen. And he thinks he's not a comedian. He's so hilarious though, but he's done improv for like 25 years. And that inspired me, like, okay, so if that's what good crowd work comes from, I want to get better, learn some improv techniques and things like that. But I decided I'm not going to go do improv classes for 25 years. It'll have to come a different way too. So, but I've liked to watch that as well. And I've noticed another local comic that I love watching is Tara Shakespeare, and she's phenomenal at crowd work. And I've kind of watched, and I don't want to give away, the formula that I've seen, but she'll like, give people a name. Like she'll give certain people in the audience a specific name, and then every time she refers back to them, that will get another laugh. And so just it's fun to watch and dissect and figure out people's unique way of doing it. Because the first time I saw her do it, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is the funniest thing I've ever seen. I don't know what she's doing. What's the magic trick? And then after I watched enough of it, I was able to go, oh, I see what she's doing here. And it's really cool, I think, to kind of figure those things out.
Absolutely.
So Crick is asking, how do you handle hecklers?
How do you handle hecklers? I think first and foremost, try to create a dynamic as best you can where people are comfortable with you and comfortable interacting with you in a way where they're not looking at you on stage thinking, oh, the only reason this person up there is interacting with us down here is to make fun of us. That could possibly get them a little defensive or maybe a little aggressive in the case of someone wanting to heckle. Can you disarm that in a way where people more feel like they're just casually meeting a new acquaintance at a barbecue? So I would say, first and foremost, you're going to have lots less hecklers and lots more positive interaction with an audience if you can kind of try and sort of create that. And then I think if you genuinely do find yourself in a position where there's a heckler, just be present with it. Is it a heckler because they're super drunk and then all you have to do is essentially kind of pause and let them shoot themselves in the foot? Is it a heckler because it's someone who's, I don't know, an idiot? In which case, you kind of let them sort of find their way into a dead end in front of an audience and realize that comedy is a lot harder than they have any idea? Or is it a heckler that you deserve because you genuinely have got up there with a bad energy and and someone's telling you something that you need to know? Like, you know what I mean? What is it?
Interesting. Yeah, I think as you progress and work more in clubs and professional settings, the hecklers are less of a thing that people have to deal with. But I've also seen some things that even at the clubs that sometimes they can get out of hand. I have a friend that she's like, no, I'm not heckling, I'm helping. So sometimes, people just think that the comedian needs their help.
Yeah. Just sorry, I just lost my train of thought of that. I'm sorry.
So I want to ask about cruise ships. So you spend about 2 weeks a month performing on cruise ships. So let's tackle that next. How did that come to be? How did you get your first gig there? What's it like? Do you feel claustrophobic being on a ship for 2 weeks, or is it several different ships during that time? Because I've been on one cruise in my life, and I kind of think of like, what would it be like to be on a cruise ship for 2 weeks at a time? So tell me all about it.
Yeah, for sure. Carol, would you mind just excusing me for 1 minute to just reload? Is that okay with you?
Oh, okay, sure, yeah.
Yeah, I'm really sorry to interrupt it. And yeah, we'll come back and absolutely launch into the cruise ships if you're okay with that.
Or yeah. Are you losing your battery? I'll be here and fill the time.
Yeah. My battery's gone down from about 80% to almost nothing at the moment, and I'm just staying with some friends. They've got a really nice little RV just next to their house, but I don't think the power is connected in here. So if I can just get that connected, I can reload really easily.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm really sorry. Just give me 1 minute, please.
All right. Well, we get a pause for a station break right now from our sponsors. Who's here? I can see we've got some other viewers here. So let me know who else is here and what questions you have for international headliner Benny. He's down there in Australia. And so far we've talked about his start at comedy 20 years ago, and his first experience down there was not an open mic experience. It was something called raw comedy. And We talked a little bit about the festival circuit, which is really fascinating to me because that is a totally different system, it sounds like, than the festival system that we have up here in the United States too. So he shared some producing tips, because in the festival scene there, you actually have to produce your own shows as part of the festival. That's something that's very different as well. We talked about how social media has been such a game changer in the last 5 years, and how if you build a big following there, it can actually be a I'm like, my internet's going out in and out too. So how building a big following on social media can be kind of a different kind of a shortcut, and how things are so different than they were 20 years ago. And Cricket asked a question about how to deal with hecklers, and Benny had to run out and get a charger for his computer, so we can talk about his experience on cruise ships. So what other questions do you all have? I'm going to let him keep staring at his the ceiling of the RV that's there. So, all right, who's here? Where are you joining us from? We're in a station break. Thank you. Or it's like the telethon break, as Benny went to get a charger for his. Is he back? Are you back? Is it working?
Yeah, so sorry about that. Did you?
I feel like I was running a telethon thing where I had to fill time and space, and
I'm so sorry.
Thank you, everyone. Oh, that's okay. I recapped the whole show up to this point.
Oh, that's great.
Is it gonna work? Did you find power? And
yeah, we're absolutely fine. Yeah, just
oh, good.
Yeah,
we crashed the whole ship.
Yeah.
Well, then we're going to talk about cruise ships. Tell me everything about working on cruise ships.
Yeah,
is the RV that you're in currently actually bigger than your
on the water?
Oh, I bet. Your room that you get to stay in a cruise ship is actually smaller than the RV you're in currently, right?
Yeah, it is. Let's have a look at this. Yeah, it's probably similar. Yeah. Yeah, a week at a time out there, and you get your little porthole, which gives you your connection with vitamin D and the outside world. And yeah, it's a total bubble. I think in all honesty, it's been an extremely kind of helpful thing for me for the last I would say about sort of 5 years. I think 2016 was the first time I went out on a cruise, and we lost a full 2 years with COVID. It took a long time for that industry to bounce back, obviously. Yeah, it in Australia, I mean, we have about sort of probably 5 kind of main cities where you could rotate between good comedy clubs. We have Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, where I am right now for this week, Perth, and then my hometown of Adelaide. You can do a bit of work at certain stages of the year as well. It's just it's not big enough to just constantly loop the cities. So I'm sort of at a point where I will headline or host whatever the good clubs in those cities, but we're not like the States in the sense that there's 50 odd states and possibly a couple of 2 or 3 even top tier comedy clubs in each of those cities where you could do them all and not loop back in a year kind of thing. We'll have a little run. I feel like every kind of, I don't know, maybe sort of 2 to 3 times a year you can knock on the door of these clubs without sort of overstaying your welcome, if that makes sense, in terms of coming back as a somewhat sort of fresh product and something that they can sort of put their marketing behind. And so I get what I'm sort of trying to say is the lack of work at that in those environments is not there because I'm not at that level. It it is there in the you know the prominent roles, you know, the hosting and the headlining, but it's just the volume isn't there. And so the ship's kind of coming along where, you know, you can do 1 to 2 weeks a month out there, and it honestly just feels like an endless supply of those audiences. You know, it doesn't feel like you're burning anything. It very rarely feels like you're performing to someone, you know, for a second time kind of thing. Here in Australia, as someone who I love that club style of comedy, I'll definitely occasionally do festivals, but I just love that whole thing of rocking up, audience is there, 30, 40, 50 minutes. That's what really appeals to me, and sort of building my skills in that environment. The cruises have been a substitute for, hey, excuse me one second. Thanks so much. Thanks, Zig. The cruises have been a substitute for us not having, you know, more comedy clubs. And I value them massively. If it weren't for them, I would still just, I mean, I was making a living before the cruises came along off of comedy, but you would absolutely be dropping down to the B minus, the C plus rooms around the country to sort of make ends meet, or there would have to be a real kind of shift in focus, perhaps more to the corporate market, you know, where to sort of make the income that you need, you have to sort of tailor your services to, you know, hosting events, and then all of a sudden, you know, your comedy is operating within the parameters of what, you know, so and so from HR thinks is funny or isn't funny, kind of thing, you know. And I mean, that's absolutely something you could do. No judgment on that, but I just want to get really good at comedy, and I think you know, the more environments I can be where the parameters are the ones that the audience gives you, and not someone else, you know, telling you what the boundaries are. They're the environments I want to work in. So I'm very, very appreciative of the ships at this kind of phase of my career.
How did you get the first gig? Did you apply? Somebody you knew referred you in?
One of our cruise lines here is exclusively booked by a particular agency, and that is the agency that is the main promoter of comedy in Brisbane. It's called the Sit Down Comedy Club. So I'm actually working for them just by pure chance this weekend. I really only get about one opportunity a year to come up here to Brisbane and work their club. But I had sort of been working there, I guess, by that stage for probably 7 or 8 years, and, you know, had literally come up and started with, you know, 5-minute spots. And so they'd seen me progress from that to, you know, doing the middle bracket, to hosting, to doing their split 30-minute headline, to being the solo headline at 45 minutes, which is the basic requirements for what you need on the ships. You need to do a 45-minute theatre show with no MC. And I guess enough versatility within those 45 minutes to handle a range of sort of in you know, environments or sort of situations. So you probably need more than 45 minutes to do 45 minutes. So that, yeah, essentially they'd sort of seen me from the start, and then it was just sort of a natural tipping point. I think I walked around to the office on a Tuesday morning or something one week that I was in Brisbane, and had a couple of coffees in my hand, and they said, do you want to do cruise ships? And they said, some people love them, some people hate them. Do you want to just go out there and see what you think? So it just organically happened for me.
Oh, that's perfect. And so when you're on the ship, are you doing one show a night or multiple shows a night?
Yeah, so it's crazy, but on the P&O line, you'll typically be on there for about a week, and they'll get you on for maybe the last 3 or 4 days of the cruise, and then the first 3 or 4 days of the next cruise. So it's a different bunch of passengers, and you're required to do one night of performing for each of those passengers. It sort of, for whatever reason, pre-COVID, it seemed like you'd just do a 45-minute set in the theatre. That can be anywhere between about 500 and 1,000 seats, depending on which ship you're on. And so you would just sort of do 2 nights of performing across a week. But now they're actually sort of getting you to double up. So we get paid a little more as well, which is good. But it also just gives you more stage time and a bit more to do out there. You do one night of performing for each cruise, but they'll get you to do 2 shows with maybe sort of an hour break in between the 2 of them. So that's kind of how that works at the moment. Yeah.
So two seatings in one night, basically. Then. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. So, and then I've heard that when you're working on a ship, you're not allowed, like in your off time, you're not allowed to go out and use any of the amenities or anything. Do you have to stay in your room besides those 2 performances, or?
Well, on the P&O line, no, it's pretty liberal. You wouldn't want to sort of find yourself back in a cabin at the end of the night with a passenger. That would quite possibly end your contract.
Frowned
overnight.
upon.
But I've got pretty much free access to any of the kind of passenger areas. I'm allowed to use the gym and the bars and the restaurants, and absolutely allowed to, or encouraged to, kind of socialize with passengers. Like you're this kind of guest entertainer, I guess, out there, and some of them might like to kind of have a chat with you here or there. So I can definitely be active out there. I'm actually just about to start working as of July, so in about 2.5 weeks. I'm about to start working on the Carnival ships as well, which I know are really big in the US out of Miami. We have a couple of them stationed in Australia now as well. I just started to do them. I think I've done about 2 or 3 cruises before COVID. I just had a little contract with them that was just starting up, and obviously that got stopped when COVID hit, and that's just rebooting now. And that's a different requirement altogether. The pay is in US dollars, so for here in Australia that works out really favorably, and probably works out to about twice as much as what I get on P&O. But you work a lot harder. The cruises are typically more like about 4 days rather than being out there for about 7 days, and they'll get you to do a minimum of 1 show per day, sometimes 2, and you're doing more like a little kind of 200-seat comedy club rather than a big main theatre, and typically about a half-hour set. The basic requirement for Carnival is that you have 3 different half-hour sets, and one of them has to be able to be performed at 2:00 in the afternoon to a family-friendly environment where there could be kids there. And from what I can recall about doing that environment, you're sort of asking about what kind of access to facilities you have or what your routine's like on the ship. That one's a lot more formal. You go on there, to work. You wear a name badge as soon as you step out of your cabin. There would definitely be times when you're not allowed in sort of certain restaurants. You're an employee. Your cabin's a lot smaller. It's an internal cabin. I know all this stuff sounds pointless, but it's like being based in a little broom cupboard where you don't have sunlight because you're there to work, as opposed to the other cruise line where for 5 days out of a week you're essentially a passenger being given a holiday, and you're a little bit of a peacock, but on a professional front you're not being asked to work as much, and you're not being paid as much. So it's sort of two different kind of gears, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool. I love all the details of that and the contrast between the two. So, yeah, because I was like, it would be cool one day to do it, but also if you had to stay in your room when you weren't performing, like the fun of a cruise ship is, socializing, partying, hanging at the pool in the hot tub, and yeah, like you said, living in a broom closet between that would not be it seems like it'd be maddening.
Yeah. I believe it or not, I'm actually kind of looking forward to. Well, I'm very much looking forward to sort of starting up with Carnival again, for that exact reason, that it's sort of efficient. I think one of the things I find a bit frustrating on the P&O ships is ironically is how well we get treated, and how little is required of us. You do a show to 500 people, and okay, we get to do a repeat show now as well. So you sort of, you get your 2 shows in a night, and then you look at your schedule and you're not required to work for the next 5 days. And, you've got all this performing energy in your body. It's been fun. It's like, honestly, I would want that. I would want those passengers to get off the next morning. Give me another 1,000 passengers, the next night, like that's where I'm at in my life and my career. I want to do this. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to do it, feel the buzz, and then kind of have, 4 days before anything's required of me again.
Oh, that's such a good point too, because that buzz of getting to do like a full weekend of shows at a club, or like, back to back road gigs over, 3 or 4 days, it definitely, like, I just find it like accelerates your growth and your jokes so much faster than like having to wait so long in between getting your next performance. So yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, I hadn't even thought about that whole part of it, about like having, okay, I'm here. I love comedy. I'm here to do stand-up comedy, and I got to wait 5 days until I get to perform again. Must be. Do you get then the passengers that find out you're the comedian, and they're like, "Tell me a joke," or "Hey, I got a story for you. You can use this."
Yeah, you might. Yeah. Aussies love doing that stuff in general, but they talk about ship fame now. Like, probably all of us as comics
Ship
hope
fame.
that at some stage we achieve a degree of genuine sort of out in the real world fame. But in the meantime, you have what they call ship fame, where you're potentially quite anonymous for the first couple of days of the cruise, as you sort of slink around in your flip-flops and your board shorts and your backwards cap, and then you're genuinely performing to maybe 1,000 of the 3,000 adults that are on that ship, on your performing night. And then from that moment on until those passengers get off, you're extremely visible. Yeah, so that's a really interesting thing to experience, and also the fact that you can be kind of just getting a coffee or something 2 days after your show, and have the person in the line behind you was someone that saw your show 2 nights ago. It's like, that doesn't happen it wouldn't happen like that on land, if that makes sense. Like, that audience is done and gone. That thing's happened, But whatever you did on that show sort of sticks with you for good, bad, or otherwise until the moment that cruise finishes.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that would be a different level of awkward, and be good or bad. And people kind of run out, Benny, and they like yell out your punchlines to you. You're like,
yeah, for sure. Yeah.
That's great. Well, Jason Rowland from Comedy Feedback shared with me how you're an amazing mentor to comics. And so I'm wondering, just kind of last question for you is like, what tips do you have for up and coming comics?
Oh, that's really
broad
really
question.
Do people know who we're talking about with Jason?
Some of them do. So my first episode was interviewing. So if go back to episode 1, Jason Rowland of Comedy Feedback. He does a showcase prep course and one-on-one, basically comedy coaching, and he's the vice president of World Series of Comedy. And so some people watching may know who he is, and some people may not. So great guy, though.
Yeah. Jason was oh wow, I don't even know how to sort of like a bit of an angel for me. Like, I went to Vancouver for the first time in 2014. I financed trips over there that year, and then in 2015, each of them cost me about a $9,000 credit card, spending maybe kind of 10 or 12 weeks in the States and Canada combined, to just kind of take that little next sort of step in my career, from just sort of performing around Australia. And Jason was the general manager of the Vancouver Comedy Mix, which doesn't even exist anymore, but at the time I think it was arguably the best club in Vancouver, and like a genuine top tier kind of comedy club that would get very good US headliners there at certain stages throughout the year. And so that was just unbelievable to kind of get an opportunity to perform there in that first year. I think I was just doing a couple of the midweek spots initially, on a lineup of 15 people, and then they were kind enough to give me a couple of the weekend spots while I was still there, just little 5-minute spots. And then the next year I came back, Jason made sure I got the 20-minute middle bracket spot which was really cool. And then it was another 3 years before I was able to get back there. So 2018, and just in a slightly off-peak time, just in all honesty, like it was I can't remember. I think they said summer there is when the audiences are lower because because of the great weather. You know, people are sort of doing things outdoors, and so that's an opportunity where they can tend to give either you know, a local act, you know, an opportunity to headline, or in my case, it was, you know, someone who was willing to sort of come across from the other side of the world and be in that area for a couple of months. They said, well, you know, why don't you headline a week? And so, you know, Jason really sort of took me under his wing, and to have that kind of support and that opportunity to kind of find my footing and grow, you know, in a particular club on the other side of the world, that was massive for me. And you know, we've stayed in touch. Jason's come out to Australia, and I was able to sort of you know, just catch up with him a little bit here, show him a few things here. And yeah, he's obviously running that for want of a better word, comedy school, comedy feedback course. You know, he's just offering so much help there to those students. He has such a broad knowledge, you know, within the industry, from what he's sort of seen with everybody who's come through the mix, and with his role in running the club. And he's just a very interesting guy as well. You know, he's been like a team manager on baseball teams and stuff like that. So for a range of reasons, he's a terrific mentor himself for you know, a lot of younger comics. And yeah, he's just sort of had me do a couple of little sessions with a couple of his classes, which I've been very sort of flattered by. And I think it's really important to, you know, not be sticky with what you know, like so many of the ways we've sort of improved or got a leg up or a new little opportunity or an insight into something is someone who's already been there. You know, just sharing something that to them is just something they know, but to you could be, you know, that little kind of shining gold nugget that kind of opens a new door for you. So yeah, I'm more than happy any opportunity where someone sort of you know, makes it clear to you that that you've got a little bit of wisdom that might help them. I think that's I think it's a good mentality to have, because it's a weird industry, isn't it? You know, where it can be a bit cliquey, and that's not a big statement, is it? You know, we're partly doing this because we have egos, and you know, we want our name up there in lights, and you know, we want every opportunity that, you know, we can sort of get our hands on to, you know, to show people what we can do. But I think that other side of it is so important. And sorry, just to take that one step further, but I'll never forget. I have a mate who he made this statement, because you know, festival environments in particular, everything's very competitive. Everyone feels like they're competing for audiences, and he just made this like general observation, and he said, let's just say 5% of, you know, the general population out there watch stand-up comedy. He's like, how about instead of all of us kind of like trying to sort of compete for that and fight for it, we make each other better, and then 10% of the population want to come out and watch stand-up comedy. Well, we're all performing the twice the numbers, you know what I mean? And that's always stuck with me. It just completely flipped the whole thing of being protective about what you know, or what you've got access to. And if we can get it out there into this kind of general space, the people who want something out of this are going to work hard anyway. Do you know what I mean? The people who are here for the wrong reasons, regardless of what information is there for them, they're not going to do the work. Do you know what I mean? It absolutely sorts itself out, you know. But why not as a starting point? Why don't we just get everything out there? You know what I mean? And give each other, you know, just the opportunity that we can to all, you know, get as good as we can.
Comedy abundance mindset. I love it. The more that we elevate each other, the more that we just elevate comedy in general, and then more people are going to want to come and watch and view and listen. That's great. And I feel very strongly in our career, it's so hard to get good comedy all by yourself if you're the only one working on your jokes. I feel like we really need those veteran comics to mentor us and help us see our blind spots and, you know, help us figure this out. You know, that's really, again, there's no school or degrees in it, and we just have each other to lean on and help us learn and get better and improve.
I think that's so true. And every, you know, every one of these people that you sort of led into your reference group in whatever way, whether it's, you know, a mentor, whether it's just someone that you happen to perform with for a week, or, you know, even if it's the audiences or whatever it is, or the opinion of a particular club booker, it's all kind of like shaping what you do. You know what I mean? You might have your basic kind of product, and you might have a particular direction that it's kind of going in. That might already kind of be there, but everyone is kind of nudging at the sides of it, if that makes sense. And you know, that it's like, what about just going a little bit more in this direction? Or do you realize that this is something you do really well? Or do you realize that you have like a little bad tendency over here or something like that? And that stuff, you know what I mean? Like, especially the better you get, the more nuanced it sort of becomes. That stuff is so valuable. And I think it only comes from that interconnection with the broader industry, doesn't it?
Yes. Yeah. You need those people that I found early on. It was first interacting with comics that were much further in than me, was like they kind of just ignore you because they're used to seeing people come and go in the industry and not really stick with it. And by the time they started, you know, tagging your jokes, or at least saying like, hey, when you do that, did you mean to say it that way? It was like, oh, they actually listen to what I'm saying. So whatever they have to say at that point is like, I'm going to take all of it in, and because it's a compliment, and they know so much more than me about this. So I'm going to take all of that and see how I can make myself better with it. So.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think we just naturally have a tendency to be defensive, don't we, when people kind of critique what we do? You know, and that is natural. But I think there's so much value in what you just sort of said, where it's like, if someone's suggesting something, it means that you've probably done well enough that their ears pricked up, that they bothered to listen to you for a few minutes and take an interest to the degree that they maybe have a suggestion for you. So, you know, at the very least, you know, appreciate that.
That's a good point. Yeah. If nobody ever gives you any feedback, that might mean that maybe you should consider a different career or hobby.
if no one gives you feedback, they are giving you feedback.
Yeah, good point. Oh, well, anything else, Benny, that you were hoping I would ask about, or anything else that you want to share with our viewers, our listeners in the future?
I think just really quickly, you asked sort of any advice before, and I think I went on a little bit of a tangent, more so about you know, Jason, and then sort of that role, I guess, of mentoring that we sometimes get presented with. My big bit of advice would be to let the it's so cliched, let the journey unfold. You know, we're so keen for like the next thing, or the next bit of validation, or the next credit, or something like that. Do you know what I mean? And we all want to be better than we are right now. I want to be a lot better than I am right now, and I'm sure most people do. And it's like, just allow that to happen. Like, you need to take care of the processes. You know, you're writing, watching, getting up as much as you can, as we were just sort of mentioning, you know, interfacing with other people to sort of, you know, nudge you sort of along that kind of track. But like, let the process do its thing. You will be better in 5 years. You will be better in 10 years. And those opportunities, I do agree that a little bit of sort of pushing, or at the least, you know, the very least, maybe putting your hand up or being sort of receptive to certain sort of opportunities is not a bad thing. But I think by and large, those opportunities will find you at the right time. You'll get your first TV gig when you're ready for your first TV gig. Even if you being ready for your first TV gig was you being ready 2 years earlier, and now you're really ready for your first TV gig. You know, that kind of stuff will find a way to come in. You know, when the time is right. I think just having some kind of trust that that the process does know what it's doing is a really valuable thing, just to kind of put that part of our minds at ease that's constantly going like, oh, where's this going? Where's the next opportunity coming from? Do I have to push? What do I have to do? Like, just do what you do. And over time, often in weird ways, what you need will come in. That would be my biggest bit of advice.
I love that. So let the journey unfold. And that reminds me, I spoke with one of my sisters yesterday, and she shared with me that she'd went on a psilocybin journey, a guided one. And the big thing the message she got, her takeaway, and it was really stood out to me, is you can't get it wrong. So about life, you can't get it wrong. And so that fits so well with your, like, just let the journey unfold. You're not going to get it wrong. It's going to be what it is. And you're going to be where you need to be when you need to be there.
Yeah.
It's so hard to do sometimes, though, because I don't know if I'm like other comics are like me, but I find myself comparing myself to, like, oh, somebody who's the same number of years in, or somebody who's less years in, and oh my gosh, they're so much further ahead. But just, I'm going to keep remembering that. Let the journey unfold. We'll be in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, 100%. And personally, whatever I am, 21 years in, like, I have friends who, even just sort of within the boundaries of Australia, have genuinely, got their name up in lights and, have fame, whether it's sort of like through radio or TV or, a particular festival sort of really sort of pushing what they do forward. And it's funny. Like, I haven't taken that path. I think at certain times there have been opportunities to sort of go down that, and for whatever reason I haven't gone down that, or it sort of hasn't sort of worked out in that way. And there are moments where I go, oh man, you're at the 20-year mark, you kind of you're on cruise ships, you're doing comedy clubs, you sort of haven't sort of said yes to radio, you haven't sort of necessarily jumped up there on TV. The average person on the street at the supermarket doesn't necessarily sort of know who you are. And I'm well aware that I have friends who I believe I'm as talented as, I put in the same sort of work as, that would be sort of having that kind of experience. And I think it's just really, really important to trust the way that things unfold for you. And just because something is a particular right way for it to kind of unfold for someone else, and maybe there's certain elements of that you'd like for yourself. I think you have to trust that you don't always understand why things are happening in a particular way for you. And for me, these environments, cruise ships, like mining camps, regional tours, inner city hipster crowds, corporate environments, overseas in half a dozen different countries, self-financed, most of the time, certainly earlier on. It's like that's been my journey, but look at what it's building in me, like the versatility and the life experience and the ability to handle different crowds, and the substance that's sort of building there, that when the right moment or the right opportunity does come along where you do just sort of nudge into a little bit more of a public profile, or things kind of become a bit more visible, it's like I wouldn't replace that substance that's there now in me for anything. And that's a substance that some people whose names were up in lights 3, 4, 5 years in and have performed in a narrower bandwidth of environments that are maybe a lot more controlled or a lot safer, etc. That's maybe a substance that ultimately they don't have. And so for me to sort of look at them and go, oh, that's what I wish I had, it's like, well, that's really flawed thinking, and you're not kind of honoring the way in which things have been laid out for you. That's a big one. And I think if you're going to genuinely sort of take something somewhere, like get world class and international, wouldn't you have wanted a really, really solid platform of having the shit beaten out of you, like in all of these different environments? Do you know what I mean? Where you've had to represent yourself and be the one to sort of make your own judgment call on what's next. And it's like just this point that I'm now getting to where I feel like that stuff is increasingly opening up. It's like now I see it. I've got 20 years. I've got 20 years to see the value in all of these things that at the time, possibly made very little sense. You know what I mean? Or you felt like you've been ignored, or you're invisible, or it's not for you. You know what I mean?
I feel like I was just at a good sermon, or like I just joined a cult and the leader just gave us the best life advice ever. It's like, amen, Benny. That's good life advice in general.
I got to stop drinking coffee before I do these podcasts.
Oh, there you go. You missed your calling. You could have had the Australian Benny's our leader. I don't know. I couldn't make it.
This sounds like a terrible cult. I'm just going to jump in here.
Yeah. Can't wait for the Netflix expose in 20 years.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, well, what's the best way for people to connect with you, follow you, website, social media? What do you want to share?
Yeah, for sure. Instagram. Yeah, Instagram. Okay. Benny Darsow. I have patches where I upload a lot of stuff to Instagram Reels and to TikTok. So Benny Darsow on that as well.
Okay.
Still got my little Facebook account, Benny Darsow, as well on there. I think Facebook's becoming more and more of a dinosaur, though.
Yeah. I kind of agree. So, well, that's where most of our viewers came from today, though. So we don't want to say too many bad things about it. Though.
Oh, is it?
Thank you all on Facebook for watching us, and also those
of
you in the future, give us a hashtag replay too. So,
yeah, no, for sure. Just a range of platforms. Let people find you how they want to find you. But yeah, happy to have any new followers on there, and also happy to converse if anyone does want to send a message or say something or ask something. Very happy to have a chat.
Excellent. I love it. I appreciate it so much. Getting up so early to be with us, starting this at 8 a.m. your time. That is such a gift. So I can't thank you enough. Thank you for everything that you've shared with us, and I look forward to, maybe someday. I've never been to Australia, so maybe I'll get to see you in person someday. So,
yeah, it's been really nice to meet you.
Do you have no show tonight, but you're getting on a cruise ship this weekend, right? Or
this weekend I'm at the Sit Down Comedy Club in Brisbane, so I've got a weekend there, and then go a little further south to the Gold Coast next week, and then I get a week at home. This is the tail end of 9 weeks on the road.
All right. So if you have any viewers or listeners in Australia, there's still time to get out there. And even if you're in another country, you know what? If you really wanted to, you could book a flight. You could make it. You could make it to a show this weekend. So
definitely buy you a tequila after the show if you do that.
There you go. All right. Well, thanks again, Benny. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. And look forward to bringing you some more great comedy tips so you can get good. I'll see you all soon. Bye now.